Good morning. It's good to see everybody this morning. So Jack says good luck. I don't know how he knew that. So my regular computer wouldn't open up last night. The printer didn't feel like printing this morning, so we may need some luck. Who knows? But I think it'll go well. The topic is one all of us are well familiar with. It's good to have you here. Thanks for coming. Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for a beautiful new day. We're thankful for the opportunity to get together and to share a study of the Word. And we just pray that you help us be open-minded, help us gain wisdom, understanding, help us build on the knowledge that we have so that we can share your Word with others and help bring others to Christ. We're so thankful for Jesus and thankful for your love. And it's in His name we pray. Amen. So we're doing Solomon. We had a little intro a few weeks ago. I don't know if you were here. Basically, we're just talking about the purpose of the class. And I plan to bring that up several times. Solomon is the choice for this particular 3-week stretch. But Solomon technically isn't what we're trying to learn from this. We're going to talk about Solomon, talk about his successes. We'll talk about Kings. We'll talk about Chronicles a little bit. But we're going to include in that what's not included in Chronicles in the latter part of Kings, where it does talk about some of the mistakes that he made. But certainly he lived up to his reputation. And so I think to set the stage for that, so I've been going back and forth in my head trying to decide exactly how to organize the class, and I really am going to land on, I'm just going to play it by ear. But what I like to do when I do a class is I like to have a class and have a discussion about the topic and everything. But at the end, toward the end of class, I like to, Charlie does this, I like to say, what do we take away from this? What I think I've decided to do is we're going to talk about early part of Kings today. We'll talk about the latter part of Kings next Sunday. And the third Sunday, we're just going to spend the class on the takeaway, because I think it is so important. We need to understand that mistakes that these gentlemen made, we're studying the Judges, and we need to have a clear understanding that the mistakes they made are mistakes potentially that we'll make. And that the things that cause them to not please God potentially are things that we can do in our life, the challenges that we have, the temptations that come our way. A lot of those, especially in the society we're living in, like just wealth is one of them, was one of Solomon's achievements. And so we have a similar challenge, I think. Without a doubt, we have a similar challenge in letting some worldly things get in the way of our relationship with God. And pretty much that's what happened, right? So what I think what I'm going to lean toward is we're going to talk about Solomon, get a real good understanding who he was, all of his successes, all of his fame and fortune, the fact that he did, in fact, prove himself to be the man that God said he could be. And then we'll talk about some of the issues that got in the way. And then in the last class, hopefully, a good open discussion about how we avoid some of those pitfalls in our life if we're challenged with them. You know, we're challenged every day with temptations and things that will cause us to make decisions that move us in the wrong direction. At least that's what I believe. And I think that sometimes we make those decisions unaware, and potentially Solomon made some of those unaware until finally it's become a force of habit or whatever how it is. It's a gradual thing. It's something that you just wake up one day wondering, how in the world did we get here? So, 1 Kings, not really successful with the overhead. So just open your Bibles, and I have the experience with the overhead when you're talking about Scripture and stuff. It's difficult to read up there. It's hard to get a large enough text in one section without scrolling or changing. So 1 Kings is where we are, the first 10 chapters, and an interesting thing, something to think about. And it's an open discussion. Feel free to raise your hand, make a comment. And one interesting thing is, if you look at Kings, is the first 10 chapters are all about Solomon and his life and his successes and all the things he did and how he did everything that God gave him the ability to do. And then chapter 11 talks about things that went wrong. So we have 10 chapters where he did everything right, and we have one chapter where he kind of fell away. Isn't that interesting? Why is this man on the face of the earth? So the question is, how did that get in the way, and how do we use that understanding, not condemning Solomon for anything? Solomon was a fantastic individual. He did a lot for the nation. He did a lot for the world. He literally was the greatest king that has ever been. And so we'll end up there. So starting off, if I can get the little computer to work with us. We start off with Solomon in the very early days. David, Bathsheba, Solomon is born. There's actually an earlier child that didn't survive, but Solomon becomes the son under questionable circumstances. But over in Chronicles 28, 5 through 7, we read, "And all of my sons, for the Lord has given me many sons. He has chosen Solomon my son to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. He said to me, it is Solomon your son who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. I will establish this kingdom forever if he continues strong in keeping my commandments and my rules as he is today." So Solomon was impressing God, right? And so God is talking to David, and we all know the story. David is old and failing in health and everything. And so the very first challenge that comes up is, who is going to inherit the kingdom, right? So I don't know how familiar everybody is with the story. Probably most of you are more familiar than I am. I don't do a lot of study in the Old Testament. But the very first challenge is, who is going to become king? And I think most of us, if not all of us, know the story. Adonijah, I think is the right way to enunciate that name, decided for himself. He was the oldest son, is that correct? No? No. But for some reason he thought he was in the lineage. And so he gathers together some individuals and he literally anoints himself king, right? And then Nathan interferes with that. So let me see if I can get the story straight. And feel free to correct me if I move off in the wrong direction. So Nathan steps in and interferes and brings David to the understanding that this is going on. So the very first thing we see is David has to intervene in who is actually going to be the next king. And let me find my spot here. And so David actually anoints, from a result of this coming to David's attention, he anoints Solomon as king, and Adonijah realizes that, and he decides that he will go to Solomon, and more or less he's going to apologize because he realizes Solomon has all the power now. And he does that, and Solomon gives in and tells him that he can live as long as he respects his authority, right? Have I got the right people? And so, yeah, I'm having to work with my little small computer here this morning. So, over in Kings, 1 Kings 1, 5 through 10. Now, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. His father had never had any time displeased him by asking, why have you done this? He was also a very handsome man, and he was born after Absalom. Oh, so he is not the first son. And he conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest. And they followed Adonijah and helped him. But Zadok the priest and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada and Nathan the prophet of Shimon and Ray and David's mighty men were not with Adonijah. And Adonijah sacrificed sheep, oxen, fattened cattle by the serpent's stone, which is beside Engel. And he invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the royal officials of Judah, but he did not invite Nathan the prophet, or Benaiah, or his mighty men, or Solomon his brother. So he anointed himself. Then we find Nathan going in and explaining that to David. And then we're down in, so I'm just going to run through this history real quick, or struggle through it, sounds like. But anyways, down in 2 Kings 1, when David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, that you do whatever you turn, that the Lord may establish his want that he spoke concerning me, saying, if your son pays close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart, with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. So God had made promises, and God is telling David that Solomon is the fulfillment of that prophecy. But we see him say a number of times along the way that it is contingent on the fact that he walked with the Lord, right? And that's what we need to keep in mind as individuals. All the things that we know, all the things that we are studying in the New Testament, and all of the gospel issues that we read that God has shared with us through the text are the things like Solomon that God expects us to walk in his way. And so that is, generally speaking, that's the purpose of the class, is how do we take these two things and look at experiences of other people and how they handled that and how they were challenged with it, and how do we use that in our behalf. One of the things I think happens to us sometimes is that we just get the feeling like, there is so much going on, I am struggling so hard. There's just nothing God can do that he can use me for. But one of the issues I hope we're recognizing out of these classes on the judges is like with Samson. We see Samson go off and do things God doesn't like, but we see God decide, I'm just going to use that. I'll take advantage of it. Keep in mind, too, one of the things we talked about in the class that these judges made decisions, trying to remember how it is written, based on the understanding in their own eyes. Is it true that we do the same thing? You think? You think that sometimes when we're reading a text or something, we're reading a commentary and somebody's explaining it, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's sort of the way you see it, right? So the way I see it, am I seeing it through my own eyes? So should we be working harder as we study and as we live this life? Should we be harder making sure our own eyes, it's fine. He told Solomon, it's fine if you do these things through your own eyes as long as they're in accordance with my will. I think that's the spot we struggle with. And sometimes we struggle with that without thinking about it. So hopefully the class will roll along here. We'll have some great discussions on influences and challenges in life. That's what I would like to see toward the third class. The influences and the challenges in life and how we can avoid those and how we can help each other with those. That's why we're here. We're here because we need to be around people of like precious faith. I have challenges in my life, and I need help and encouragement with that. And other people here have a similar thing, and I need to help them and encourage them with that. So a part of being here as a family, along with the fact that we're here to worship and to study, but a huge part of it is that we're a family, and we're encouraging and helping each other with the challenges that we're faced with. So hopefully we'll gain some insight into how we're better able to not only work with those challenges, but help each other with those as well. So just scrolling through the history of Solomon's life, eventually Adonijah comes around. He says, I'm going along with everything, but then he comes around and he just wants one little favor, right? And what I didn't know until I started studying and reading some commentaries and things is this one little favor was a practice from the past where if you slept with the king's concubines, you gained the power of the kingship through their relationship. And so what we find in actuality is this just another attempt for Adonijah to try and move into the power of the kingship. And Solomon sees the same thing. So what happens now? What does Solomon do now? Solomon says, I guess you didn't do what needed to be done. You said you were going to honor my power and the throne, and here we are. You're trying actually to dethrone me. So Solomon kills him. So one of the discussions that I am interested in us thinking about is, we go through these things. David meets with Solomon, and David gives him several people that he is supposed to kill, right? He warns him about these people. And Solomon follows through with it. Is that a problem? What do you think about that? So one of the first things he does is take out these individuals without spending too much time on the history. I think most of us know that. So what do you think about that? Was it wise? I think this happened before the dream, right?
In the case of Joab,
So David was just telling him to follow through with the punishment. And what he's saying is Joab had murdered someone in the past. Joab was about revenge, right? And so he had murdered in the past. And so Solomon just followed through with the judgment that should have been passed a while back. Adonijah's trying to steal the kingdom. What was the other person? I forget what the other person's problem was. So here is an interesting take on that. Solomon, when he took power, knew that there were influences and challenges in the kingdom that would potentially disrupt the kingdom, and he eliminated those. Think that was God's will? Was he still pleasing God by removing? Did God not do the very same thing with Canaanites and others in the past? So we're in that part of history where God is willing to destroy the opposition. And basically that's what Solomon did. If you read, you find all these different opinions about whether this was just politics, this was just revenge, this was just all of these things. But Elisha pointed out in the little intro we did a few weeks ago, Solomon already had wisdom. When he has the dream here in the next chapter or two, he is wise enough to ask God for wisdom, right? Because that took some understanding. Glenn, you got your hand up?
152, he gave him the chance. And Solomon said, if he will show himself a worthy man, not one of the hairs of his head shall fall to the earth, but if wickedness is found in him, he shall die. He had a chance to make the turn.
Yes. When he first realized that he had tried to steal the kingdom. And
The kings were given authority to go out and take out people. You know, where God says if you do this thing wrong, you get stoned and all that. So they had authority to do that. They were the police. They were the military. And God does put certain people in power to give them that ability.
so they were judge and jury and executioner. Any other comments there? So then Solomon has the dream we're all familiar with, Bob?
Also in that situation, we need judge and jury.
Yeah, I think so. So now Solomon has the dream that we're familiar with, and he asks for wisdom. And in that dream, God tells him that he will give him that, but he also tells him he's going to give him some of the things he didn't ask for, right? But again, in that interaction with God, he reminds him, this is going to work as long as you do my will. So keep that in mind as we go through the class. So it is extremely impressive when you read through Kings as it talks about Solomon and how he organized everything, how he built. He started out with the kingdom, and then he built things. He used his wisdom with the two ladies that were fighting over the child. He built the house of worship. He built his house. He just did amazing things, right, as it goes along. And when you're reading all that in your mind, you're thinking it's really interesting if you stop every now and then and go back and look and see really what is this he's accomplished. He built the temple in 7 years. Is that right? I think it was 7 years. You know, we can't build a building like that in 7 years. So he did, not only was it amazing things, it was in a period of time when the amount of, the process of planning, the process of organizing, you know, that's where the wisdom, you see all of these talents that God has blessed him with come into play. Of course, it took great wealth in order to put all this together and make sure that it all happened, that the supplies were in the train, you know, the supply train, the supply lines. So you see in some of these events as we look at historically, as we look at some of the stuff he did here in the first 10 chapters, you look at him actually utilizing all of these characteristics that God has blessed him with. So he actually we had a short discussion about just how wise was he. You know, did he have instant wisdom? or not so instant wisdom. You look back after the fact at some of the decisions that he made, and you think, man, didn't sound too wise. But it is really amazing, especially coming from a construction background, how he put all this together in what is really, in this particular period of time, an unbelievably short period of time to spend in that kind of construction. Recently, we were over in Greece looking at some of those structures over there, and the archaeologists were talking about how long it took them to build that, and I'm thinking, well, we've got cranes and all kinds of stuff. We can't build this stuff in a few short years. It's amazing, the talent, the ability, the dedication, the workforce. Of course, everybody had slaves, so the slaves didn't have much of a choice. But it's just amazing when you look at all of it and think about all of it, at how it happened. And then when, at least from a perspective, and you may share a different perspective, it is just difficult to comprehend the massive amount of understanding, the massive amount of wealth. And so when you really get to reading the text and thinking about it, it's exactly right. He was the most wise, he was the richest, he was the best coordinator, he was the best at everything he did, and especially in the period of time in which he worked. So then, jumping past some of that historical stuff, the interesting thing for me that I wanted to read and let's have a little conversation about. We've got plenty of time. When you get down to chapter 10, when we get to the end, he's built the temple, he's made these wise decisions, the ones with the ladies, with the child. And when you get down to 10 and we talk about the Queen of Sheba, this is one of those things when you read it and look at it that just says, absolutely, he pleased God in all of those things that he did. And it reads, "Now when the Queen of Sheba heard the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices, and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind, and he answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his officials, the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his cupbearers, his burnt offerings that he offered the house of the Lord, there was no more breath in her. And she said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I came and my own eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told to me. Your wisdom and prosperity surpassed the report that I heard. Happy are your men, happy are your servants who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he has made you king, and that you may execute justice and righteousness. And then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, and a very great quantity of spices and precious stones. And never again came such an abundance of spices as these that the Queen of Sheba gave to Solomon. I think it was 1,200 miles she traveled on a camel. Is that right? Can you imagine making a 1,200-mile trip on a camel's back with and this word up here, I lost it, a retinue. It is literally a combination of words if you look at the Septuagint. That is, what is, I guess her entourage might be a fair word, but it's not really, because entourage tends to talk about people. This was all the people that she brought, all the material goods that she brought to give to him. That particular word represents the fact that you just can't imagine how big this procession was, and how far they traveled. I have no idea how long it took to go 1,200 miles on a camel's back. It would sort of be like almost crossing the U.S. here, at least from here to Texas or something on a camel. That would be an interesting trip. The 120 talents of gold was about 4.5 tons of gold. You know, it's just when you read this and think about it, and you've got this person, and I'm not sure, does anybody know, like, who was the Queen of Sheba? I don't know, I've heard that before, but I've never done any research in that direction.
Candace mentioned in the New Testament in regards to the Ethiopian eunuch.
Ah.
But it's supposition.
So there's just a lot of supposition about it. There's nothing historical that we can look back on. But apparently, an unbelievably wealthy and authoritative person had a lot. The questions that she asked Solomon would be interesting to know, but there's no indication of what that would have been. Along with that, though, she came with all these material goods with all these people, and then she is so overwhelmed by her experience with him that she says only half of it was told to her. So if there's ever any doubt, not that any of us had doubt, it's interesting to wonder how he can make unwise decisions with all of this. But if there was ever any doubt that Solomon measures up to the claims that the Bible has, that he will be and was the wealthiest, most intelligent, most wise, the king that accomplished the most. He was, in fact, everything that God told him he could be, and everything that God wanted him to be in his lifetime. He accomplished all that. So that's, it's an overwhelming thought. But what that shows us is, I think, one of the things it shows us is, it doesn't matter if you have all of that you can still be tempted. And maybe even more, right? I mean, what is the concept of someone who wins something like the lottery? All of that wealth is an unbelievable temptation, right? And most people, the statisticians say the average lottery winner is financially worse off 7 years later than he was the day before he won. It destroys lives. And a lot of these things, a lot of these challenges destroy life. So when we look at these things and think about these things, let's focus on figuring out how we will use that as we are challenged with temptations in our life. I'm not sure there's any way to avoid temptations, but I believe that one of the reasons why you can look at Solomon and wonder how somebody with all of that wisdom could make bad mistakes, I think it would be reasonable to say the more you have, the easier it is to be tempted. Would you think? The better position you're in, the more authority you have, the more influence you may have or something, the more you're tempted to use that in the wrong way. So what we're really studying, what we're really looking at is, how do we take Scripture and find a way to stay as close to what God has expected and asked us to do as we possibly can? Any questions or comments? Comments about any of these, Ted?
Yeah, in the reading there, what is an elbow tree? You know?
In the reading, what is what?
An ALMUG tree. He says, it's in verse 11.
Yeah, Was that like the cedars of Lebanon or something along that?
Says they thought it might be a juniper tree.
A juniper tree? Yeah, I don't know. Does anybody know? In verse 11, the albina tree, what was it? And I don't think this Septuagint says anything any different.
Doing a emergency bit of research. This isn't known. Nobody knows for sure what this was.
Ah,
Maybe juniper.
another speculation.
Similar to sandalwood.
Sandalwood.
Similar to sandalwood
I'm not sure I know what sandalwood is. It's supposed to be a woodworker. I don't know if I've ever heard of sandalwood. So what kind of, is hardwood, is like what? Oh, like the cedars of Lebanon, or in that family, in that area. That's what I was, just an assumption, but that's what I would think, because that was one of the most famous trees, during those time periods. So if you will, for next week, not quite done, but for next week, take a look at chapter 11. Just read through it. And what I would like to do is have a nice back and forth conversation. I prefer a discussion kind of a class. Makes my mind work better. And let's just have an open discussion about some of the issues, some of the challenges, a little speculation, something that helps us figure out how do we avoid these kinds of challenges. We're a wealthy society. Yes.
I learned from Solomon's life, and really David's too, is you can have a good heart and have a weakness. And in particular, I find it fascinating that Solomon is up on the high places sacrificing when God gives him the dream and the wish, right?
Yeah.
And I think what we can learn from that is, just because you see someone who has a problem or an issue, it does not mean they have a bad heart.
Yeah, I would agree. One thing that comes to mind when I think about that, in some ways, how all of the electronics, the social media is just keeping up with everything we do and look at and say and everything. Satan was the first one to come up with that idea, right? And the older you are, the better he knows you, and the easier it is for him to come up with a good temptation. And so in his later years, he's just human. Solomon is human, like all of us. As we get older, Satan knows more and more about where our weaknesses are. And it becomes a bigger challenge as we get older, trying to stay ahead of him. Yes?
Chapter 10, verse 23, it says, "Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom which God had put into his mind." Solomon reached his peak. That's the problem. He reached the peak.
Oh, yes, that's true. That's a good point.
And after he had excelled and everybody knew it, he made silver as common as stone in Jerusalem. That's how rich he was.
Yeah, the amount of wealth is pretty overwhelming.
So he reached a peak.
Yeah, he was
And
getting...
that's what happened with his fall.
He was getting in taxes like a couple of tons of gold every year. Doris?
Yeah, I remember many years ago, I was talking to Al Bergeron about this, and of course he said, how could someone so wise as Solomon turn away from God? And he pointed out, it was kind of like the first part of Judges, trusting in their own wisdom. He had become reliant on his own wisdom and thought that it was his and not God's.
And the judges did what was right in their own eyes. And we do too, right? And instead of, especially in Solomon's case, I think, or in most cases, I don't necessarily, in my mind, use the terminology turned away. I prefer to think, drifted away. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I mean, we've all had experiences in life where we're doing something, we're thinking, I don't know how we got here, you know? Like what went wrong, you know? And what went wrong was slowly over a long period of time, you just drifted into a habit that suddenly you're thinking, well, I don't know how this happened. But did I see a hand over here somewhere? No? So keep the point in mind. Who was it? Oh, sorry.
And that just shows when you start trusting in your own wisdom, you take your eyes off God. That's the problem. That's how you drift away or turn away, however you want to do it. Once you start focusing on yourself instead of God, then all these things start going wrong.
Yes, that's true. I'm one of those word people too. I buy all these books on word origins and stuff, and you made me think of the expression as I was growing up, and there's some folks in here old enough to remember that. He got too big for his britches. I can't picture that. I don't know exactly why that's relative to the problem, but yeah, in his case, like Beth was saying, he had it all. Like there was nothing else to get. Now you're bored, I guess, and now you're wandering off into some things you shouldn't be doing. Who knows? In the beginning, he's all focused on what God expects and the nation and what the nation needs, taking care of the needs of the people, because he actually, the text and even the Queen of Sheba, they all verify that he did that for Israel. Yes?
There are several other passages that talk about the danger of great wealth because it tends to make it so that we are not depending on God. It kind of sounds like maybe that's what was going on with Solomon.
Could very well be. Could very well be. And the great wealth, you know, it's going to be a huge challenge. Doesn't matter who you are or where you are. It would just come natural. One of the things I like to read a lot, and talking about the lottery a few minutes ago, the very first person, this is an example of how great wealth can really impact your life. The very first person to win a large amount from the lottery, I forget the number, it wasn't like it is today, this was a long time ago. That individual was worth $7 or $8 million. He had, if you read the story, sometime if you're interested, you can Google that and read it. But he had a very successful business. He was very philanthropic. He gave a lot of money to the church. He took this little town he lived in, took care of people and did all this stuff. And he won, let's say, $100 million from the lottery. And over a very short period of time, he began to resent the fact that people didn't treat him like he was the most important person in town. His granddaughter, his favorite granddaughter, he just gave her everything she ever needed. She died from a drug overdose. If you read that, it just shows you how you can be very wealthy and get more wealth and fall off the way. It really isn't that we shouldn't try to be comfortably wealthy, you know, that we shouldn't be planning. God expects us to plan for the future. He expects us to take care of family. He expects us to be able to be philanthropic, to help people. We see it in the New Testament. They were in a different society, a different time where the cost of living was way different and everything, but still they gave every time they could, and they gave till it hurt a lot of times. So there's nothing wrong with the mentality of that, but what happens is when it becomes so great that it's unimaginable in a manner of speaking, it becomes such a great temptation that rare is the person that can probably deal with it. And most likely that was a big part of Solomon's problem. Did the other bell ring? Oh, it did? Sorry, I didn't hear it. Thanks for your attention. Look at chapter 11, and next week we'll have a good conversation over the challenges and see if we can find a way to not be influenced.